The day my brother graduated from medical school, I was sitting in a folding chair in the third row, still wearing the same jeans I'd driven 4 hours in, holding a gas station coffee that had gone cold somewhere around the state line. I hadn't slept properly in 3 days. My mother had been discharged from the hospital the week before, and I was the one managing her medications, her follow-up appointments, the twice-daily wound care that the home nurse had shown me how to do on a paper towel diagram at the kitchen table. My brother, I'll call him by what he is, not his name. My brother walked across that stage in his white coat, and I clapped until my palms hurt. I was so proud of him I could barely breathe. I didn't know that in about 6 months, he was going to stand up at a dinner table in front of the most important people in my professional life and introduce me as someone who never really amounted to much. I didn't know that. And honestly, even if I had, I'm not sure it would have changed anything I did. That's the part that still keeps me up sometimes. Let me back up. I'm the older one. By 4 years. When people find that out, they always look at me with this particular expression, part sympathy, part confusion, because the story of our family doesn't make sense in the order it's supposed to go. My brother, Oliver, was always the one everyone pointed to, the one with the plan, the one who knew from the time he was 12 that he was going to be a doctor, and who structured every single decision around that goal with a kind of cold precision that I genuinely admired, even when it left me feeling like I was standing slightly outside the frame of a photograph I was supposed to be in. I wasn't jealous. I want to be honest about that, because it matters for everything that comes later. I wasn't jealous of him. I was proud of him. The problem wasn't Oliver. The problem was that nobody ever asked what I'd given up so that he could become who he was. My mother got sick when I was 26. I was 3 years into a marketing role at a mid-size agency in Chicago, the kind of job where you stay late because you want to, not because you have to. I was good at it. My manager, Teresa, had started talking to me about a senior position that was opening up. I had a lease on an apartment I actually liked. I had, for the first time in my adult life, something that felt like momentum. Then my mom called me on a Tuesday afternoon in October and said she'd been diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's. Her voice was very calm. She'd always been calm. It was one of the things about her that I both loved and found slightly impossible to reach. "I don't want you to worry," she said. I was already worried. The thing about Parkinson's is that it progresses differently for everyone. Some people manage independently for years. My mother was not one of those people. Within 8 months, she had fallen twice. Her medication schedule was complex and critical, and she lived alone in the house we'd grown up in, 40 minutes outside of Columbus. She had friends, but none of them were in a position to provide daily care. She had a sister who called on birthdays. And she had me and Oliver. Oliver was in his second year of residency, 90-hour weeks. I understood that. I genuinely understood that. He was in Pittsburgh, I was in Chicago, and our mother was in Ohio. And there was a very simple geography to what happened next, even if I didn't see it clearly, until I was already inside it. I asked for remote work options. My company said no. I looked into home care agencies and ran the numbers against my salary and the cost of my apartment and my student loans, and realized that the math didn't work, not without a financial base I didn't have. I called Oliver. We talked for an hour. He cried a little. He said he felt terrible. He said if there was any way he could, there wasn't. We both knew it. I gave notice on a Thursday. I was in Columbus by the following Monday. I want to be very precise about something. Nobody asked me to do this. My mother didn't ask. She actually argued against it. She said I was throwing away my career and she'd never forgive herself. I told her that was dramatic. And she laughed. And it was the first time I'd made her laugh in weeks, so I called that a win and started learning her medication schedule. For the next 3 years, I was my mother's primary caregiver. I managed her appointments, her physical therapy, her dietary needs, her emotional needs on the days when the disease felt like a personal insult to her identity. I watched her lose things, small things first, then bigger ones, with a grace that I found both inspiring and devastating. I learned to be present in a way I hadn't been before. I learned that caregiving is not a passive act. It requires more skill and stamina and emotional intelligence than any job I have ever had, including the one I eventually came back to. I also learned that the world does not care about any of that. The world looks at a resume gap and sees absence. It does not see the 3 a.m. medication alarms. It does not see the afternoon I sat on the bathroom floor with my mother while she cried because she couldn't button her own shirt, and I held her hand and told her that I had nowhere else I'd rather be, which was true. It does not see any of it. The world just sees the blank space and makes its own conclusions. Oliver came home for Christmas when he could. He sent money sometimes, which helped. He called every Sunday. He was a good son in the ways that were available to him. I told myself that, and I meant it, and I still mean it. The problem was never Oliver. My mother passed away in the spring of my third year back in Columbus. She went quietly, which was what she'd wanted. I had been with her the night before, and I told her everything I needed to tell her, and she squeezed my hand twice, which was how she said she heard me. I was 31. I stayed in Columbus for another few months, settling the estate, cleaning out the house. It was during that time that I started doing freelance marketing work again. Small clients, mostly through referrals. Nothing that required me to pretend I hadn't been out of the traditional workforce for 3 years. I was quiet about it. I wasn't ready to explain myself to anyone. I was still, on some level, figuring out who I was on the other side of what I'd done. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to know, was that one of those small clients was going to change everything. Her name was Nadia Rourke. She ran a boutique skincare brand out of Columbus that had good products and terrible marketing. She'd found me through mutual contact, and she was direct about her budget low and her expectations high, and I liked her for both those things. We worked together for 4 months. I redesigned her entire brand voice, rebuilt her email strategy, and helped her land her first regional retail account. Then she introduced me to her investor. His name was Mr. Calloway. He ran a venture fund that focused on consumer brands in the Midwest, and he was, as I would later understand, one of the most quietly influential people in that space. He was soft-spoken, methodical, and had the kind of eyes that made you feel like he'd already thought through 3 responses before you finished your sentence. We met over coffee, which turned into a 2-hour conversation about brand positioning that I didn't want to end. He asked about my background. I told him, all of it, including the gap, including my mother, including why I'd left Chicago. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. "So you made a decision," he said, "and you're not ashamed of it." "I'm not ashamed of it," I said. "Good," he said. "You shouldn't be." He didn't offer me anything that day. He said he'd be in touch, which I assumed meant he wouldn't be, because that's what people say. But he was. Over the next year, he sent me 2 small consulting projects through his portfolio companies. I did good work. He noticed. Things moved slowly, then all at once, the way they always do. My brother graduated from his residency in June. The celebration dinner was at a restaurant downtown Columbus. His choice, a nice Italian place, with about 40 people. His med school friends, colleagues, our aunt who flew in from Phoenix, some family friends we'd had our whole lives. I had helped organize it. I'd made the reservation, coordinated the guest list, ordered a cake that had his graduation year piped across the top in blue frosting. Mr. Calloway was there because he was a longtime family friend of Oliver's mentor, Dr. Huang, who had been invited. I had not known he would be there until I walked in and saw him at the far end of the table, talking quietly with Dr. Huang's wife. I gave him a small nod across the room. He nodded back. What happened next I have tried to reconstruct as precisely as I can, because people who weren't there have asked me about it, and I want to tell it accurately. Oliver made a toast. It was a good toast, warm and a little funny, and he thanked Dr. Huang and his other mentors. And then he looked at me across the table and said he wanted to thank me for everything I'd done for our family. And his voice broke a little, and I had to look at my water glass for a second. That part was real. Then our aunt, my mother's sister, visiting from Phoenix, who had called exactly twice during the 3 years I spent as a caregiver, stood up and decided, apparently, that she also had something to say. She had been drinking. I want to note that not as an excuse but as context. She raised her glass and said, in a voice loud enough for the whole table to hear, that she wanted to say how proud she was of Oliver for becoming a doctor and doing something real with his life. And then she turned to me and said, and I'm going to quote her directly because I want to be precise. And this is my other niece who's been between things for a few years, still trying to figure it all out at 31. She said it warmly. That was somehow the worst part. She said it like it was a benign observation, like she was describing the weather. The table went slightly quiet. I felt the specific cold calm that I've learned over years happens to me when I'm most hurt. My face stayed neutral. I picked up my glass. I said, "Nice to see you two." A few people laughed, nervously. Oliver looked at me with an expression I recognized as the one he made when he didn't know what to do and was hoping I did. Mr. Calloway, from the far end of the table, had not looked away from my aunt. He waited until the end of the dinner. People were having coffee and the cake had been cut, and the volume of the room had risen back to something comfortable. My aunt was talking to someone else, no longer paying attention to me. I was talking to one of Oliver's friends from med school when Mr. Rennell Calloway came and stood nearby, and I broke off the conversation and turned to him. "That was interesting," he said. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said. "Don't apologize." He paused. "Do you know what I've been thinking about for the last hour?" I said I didn't. "I have a brand strategy director position opening up at the fund," he said. "We've been operating without one, and it's starting to show. I've been watching you work for a year. I know what you're capable of. I've been trying to think of the right moment to bring this up." He looked briefly in my aunt's direction. That was an interesting motivator. I didn't say anything. I was very careful not to let my expression do anything I'd regret. "I'm not offering you a job because I feel sorry for you," he said quickly, like he'd anticipated the thought. "I'm offering it because you're the right person, and the timing has been genuinely hard to find. If you need a week to think about it, take it." I didn't need a week. "I'd like to hear more," I said. We stepped outside into the warm June evening and talked for 40 minutes while the dinner wound down inside. He told me about the fund, the portfolio, what he needed. I asked questions, good ones I think. The kind that come from actually understanding a space rather than performing knowledge of it. When I walked back in, my aunt was putting on her coat. "Early flight," she told me. "It was so good to see you, honey. Hopefully things will start coming together for you soon." She patted my arm. "They already have," I said. "But thank you." She didn't catch it. That was fine. I wasn't saying it for her. Oliver pulled me aside before the evening ended. "I heard you and Mr. Calloway talking outside," he said. "Are you okay?" What she said was, "It's fine," I said. "It's not fine." "No," I agreed. "It's not. But it's also not the first time someone has looked at me and seen a gap on a paper instead of a person. I've made my peace with it." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't make peace with it," he said. "You just got very good at not showing it." That surprised me enough that I laughed. "Yeah," I said. "Maybe." He hugged me then, and I let him. And I thought about my mother, about the specific way she had looked at me sometimes during those 3 years, like she could see something in me that I couldn't see myself. She'd said once, on a good day, a day when the medication was working and the light in the kitchen was right, and she was sitting at the table with coffee, "You're going to be fine. Not because things are going to be easy, because you've already proven you can carry what's hard." I told her that was a lot of pressure. She'd said, "I know, I raised you." I took the position with the fund. In the months that followed, I built something I was genuinely proud of, a brand strategy framework that Mr. Calloway said had changed how the fund evaluated consumer-facing investments, which sounds abstract but meant real things for real companies. I was good at the work. I had always been good at the work. The 3 years I'd spent outside the traditional workforce hadn't erased that. If anything, they'd given me a different relationship to what I was doing, less attached to the performance of productivity, more focused on what actually mattered. My aunt sent a card when she heard. It said she always knew I'd figure it out. I put it in a drawer and left it there. The thing I've come to understand, sitting with all of it, is that people who have never been asked to set down their ambitions for someone they love don't have the language for what that costs. They see the gap and they fill it with their own assumptions. That you were lost, that you were struggling, that you were figuring it out. Because that's the most comprehensible narrative available to them. It's not malicious, mostly. It's just a failure of imagination. The harder thing to hold is that their assumptions don't become your truth just because they say them out loud. My mother knew what I'd done and why I'd done it. Mr. Calloway, when I told him the full version of the story, looked at me and said, "That tells me everything I need to know about how you make decisions." Oliver, my brother, the doctor. He knows. He said it plainly, more than once, in ways that cost him something to say. That's enough. It has to be enough. And on most days it is. The dinner with my aunt was not the ending of anything. It was just a moment at a table in a nice Italian restaurant in Columbus, Ohio, where someone who didn't know the full story made a judgment with partial information, and the right person happened to be sitting close enough to hear it, and already knew better. Sometimes that's how it works. Not always. Not often even. But sometimes. I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was cool out, because I needed the air, and I thought about my mother, and I thought about the 3 years, and I thought about the version of me that had sat in a folding chair at my brother's med school graduation with a cold gas station coffee, clapping until her hands hurt. She would be okay with where this ended up. I'm sure of it. I've thought a lot about what my aunt said that night. Not in a bitter way. I'm past bitter, mostly. But in the way you turn something over when you're trying to understand what it actually was. She wasn't cruel. That's the honest truth. She was just someone who looked at a person and only saw the surface of their years. She saw the gap in the resume. She saw the absence from the professional world. She filled that absence with the most available story, that I had drifted, stalled, not quite figured it out yet. And she said it out loud, warmly, with a glass of wine in her hand, in front of 40 people and the one man who happened to know the full picture. That's the thing about assumptions. They're not always hostile. Sometimes they're just lazy. And lazy judgments, spoken confidently enough, have a way of landing like facts, unless someone in the room knows better. Mr. Calloway knew better. Not because I'd performed anything for him. Not because I'd lobbied for his approval or corrected anyone's perception of me. He knew because we had worked together for a year, and the work had spoken in a language that didn't need defending. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the dinner, not my aunt's comment, not the particular sting of hearing someone reduce 3 of the hardest years of my life to still figuring it out. What I keep coming back to is that the work was already done. The truth was already there. I hadn't needed that evening for anything to be real. There's something in that worth sitting with, I think. Not as a comfort, though it is a comfort, but as a principle. The decisions that cost you the most are often the ones that look, from the outside, like nothing at all. Choosing to leave Chicago wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with applause or recognition. I didn't make it for an audience. I made it because my mother needed someone, and I was someone who could be there, and that was the beginning and the end of the reasoning. The dignity, in that choice, was never going to be visible to anyone who hadn't watched me live inside it. What I understand now, that I couldn't have told you at 26, is that character is not performed for observers. It's built in the private hours, the 3 a.m. medication alarms, the mornings when you hold someone's hand through something they can't control, and neither can you. Oliver became a doctor. I became something harder to name, but no less real. The world eventually found a language for it. Mr. Calloway found it first, standing outside an Italian restaurant on a warm June night. But the thing itself existed long before anyone put words to it. My mother told me once that the measure of a person isn't what they do when it's easy. It's what they do when the decision costs them something, when no one is watching, when the reward is not guaranteed. She wasn't quoting anyone. She was just talking, the way she talked. Plainly, looking out the kitchen window. I didn't write it down. I didn't need to. She was right. And somewhere in that rightness is the only lesson I can honestly offer. Do the thing that you can live with, not the thing that looks best on paper. not the thing that earns the most immediate admiration. The thing that, 3 years later, 5 years later, you can look back at in the quiet and feel settled about. The consequences have a way of catching up to the character eventually. You don't have to force it. You don't have to explain it. You just have to keep doing the work and trust that the right people, in the right moments, will already know.